Hello, and welcome to the Trusted Computing Group's webcast. This is our cybersecurity webcast, and we'll be talking to you today and explaining critical strategies that you can use to protect your enterprise against the growing problem of cybersecurity. Now, before we get into the webcast, I'd like to review a few logistical points here. You should be able to see the slides that are being presented. The current one is titled Webcast Logistics, and you should be able to hear my voice. If you're not able to do so, please feel free to submit a response using the Ask a Question text box. And I'm happy to say that all those who have registered for this event will receive a link to the recorded webcast afterwards in an email, so that you will be able to view and listen to that recorded webcast and forward that link to others. So if you do have any technical difficulties with the webcast today, you can use that as a mechanism as well. I hope you enjoy this webcast, and I hope that you tune into some of our future webcasts as well. We have one coming on November 19th on Industrial Control System Security. Now, with no further ado, I'll move on to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter will be Atul Shah. Atul is a senior security strategist at Microsoft. Atul has quite a few years of experience in the IT security industry, ranging across a wide range of aspects and parts of IT security. Today he's responsible for the end-to-end trust initiative within Microsoft, and also co-chairs the Trusted Network Connect work group and Trusted Computing Group. And our second presenter today will be Steve Hanna. Steve is a distinguished engineer at Juniper Networks and the co-chair of the Trusted Network Connect work group in Trusted Computing Group and the Network Endpoint Assessment Working Group in the IETF. As you may have noted, this is a one-way audio webcast, so any questions that may arise during the webcast that you would like to ask, the best way for you to do that is with the Ask a Question text box, and then at the end of the webcast, we'll be glad to answer any of those questions. And now, we'll move on to the main content of our webcast. And Atul will start us off. Atul?
Thank you, Steve. So, the topic of this webcast is cybersecurity challenges. And the first slide of this, as you should be able to see now, is talking about the juxtaposition of cybersecurity challenges with the ability of an organization to defend itself. We have more and more different types of attacks on our networks and against our assets, and we will go into more detail shortly on those. But there's a confluence of two trends. Though the second part of decreasing ability to defend, it's more about the offense, the cybersecurity threats and challenges that are growing faster than the ability for an organization to effectively defend itself. So what we have to understand is that we have to use newer and more advanced defensive techniques to counter the new offensive tactics which are being utilized in cybersecurity today. And we'll talk more about those as we go forward. So talking about the recent threats and attacks, one of the ways that we should take a look at the cybersecurity landscape is getting a quick understanding of what happens when we are attacked. One of the first ones on this list is, you'll notice, the distributed denial of service attacks against U.S. banking and the New York Stock Exchange. And it really demonstrated the complexity and the current reality of cyber threats. You know, the fact that who actually sanctioned the attacks and who carried them out might be in dispute, as you might see if you search on it on this disruption campaign. But what is not in dispute is the sophistication of the attacks and the targeted focus from the determined adversaries against these finance websites. Earlier this year, reports surfaced about the targeted attacks against U.S. defense contractors. This is the classic supply chain issue. Major corporations and governments do need to worry about thousands of suppliers and the suppliers of their suppliers who have authorized access to parts of their networks and assets. And it's all about that weakest link in the ever-growing chain. In fact, major investments in cybersecurity were announced following these attacks by some of the defense contracting companies. Similarly, if you're looking for a direct impact to a company's bottom line through some very complex mechanisms and reasons, look no further than the hacktivist attacks like the ones on Stratford, among many others. This type of an attack presents a double whammy, because not only is there an issue of loss of data or intellectual property, but there's also the potential for embarrassment and the erosion of public confidence or the customer's confidence in the organization, which does take a long time to fix. Then there have also been well-chronicled, highly destructive critical infrastructure systems attacks, and they have been very destructive in the sense that we're talking about wiping out the majority of hard drives and servers. The servers that are not only hosting critical business data, but also the IT infrastructure management components in an organization, which takes, again, a long time and a lot of money to recover from. So, as we can clearly see from these cyber attacks, they cause data loss, they cause downtime, they cause perception, confidence, image issues for an organization, and of course, in some cases, the weakening of the country's critical infrastructure and defense capabilities. Consequently, it naturally flows that for a sound cybersecurity defense strategy, we have to identify the priorities that are important to the organization. This slide talks about two such priorities. The next slide will talk about two more. And essentially what we have tried to show here is the categorization of impact in terms of the priority for the organization from these cyber attacks. For example, cyber attacks cause downtime. Downtime equates to loss of revenue. So a top cybersecurity priority has to be prevention of downtime. Safeguarding intellectual property. Because if you don't, it leads to loss of competitive advantage and other compromises. And the key thing to take out of all of this is that when we talk about cybersecurity challenges and threats and attacks, what's given is that there will be an attack, and it's a matter of when and how. It's not a matter of if. So, as has been said before elsewhere, assume breach. And if that is the case, then what are the priorities to go after to make sure that we can minimize and contain the damage? Prevent downtime, safeguard crown jewels, maintain reputation. As you've seen in the previous slide on the different attacks we talked about, erosion of customer confidence is a very important element. And then, of course, protecting the critical infrastructure. In particular, large unsecured industrial control systems. There are older technologies, older implementations that now become part of the threat landscape because they're on the internet and therefore targets. So how do we ensure that these priorities are taken care of and the industrial control systems are protected. And in the beginning, as Steve mentioned, there is a webcast that goes further into the details of industrial control systems that you can take a look at coming up later. So, what does this all mean? We talked about 4 different priorities. So the next logical step would be to determine and quantify as much as possible what the risks are that would compromise these priorities. It's just like a nation's counterterrorism plan starts with understanding the threats it faces. The same applies here when we're faced with cyber attacks and threats. We have to understand threats. And as we've learned before, understanding and quantifying cyber threats pose a real and increasingly complex challenge because there are many actors that are carrying out these attacks, and they have very different motives, complex motives in some cases, attacks that increasingly don't look that different from legitimate network traffic. There's coordination of attacks and coordination among the attackers that uses a shared infrastructure. There's unpredictable consequences, and of course, potentially disastrous impact of these attacks. So, understanding the threat, who is attacking you, what are they going after, the key assets, intellectual property, reputation, financial data, and then quantifying the risk. How are they doing it? What is the impact of that attack? Those are all important elements, important risk assessment steps that we must all take for cybersecurity. Once we understand and quantify the risks and threats, then we can begin to put effective countermeasures and protections in place. Some of the mechanisms used in an attack may include information gathering or sniffing and spoofing, session hijacking, causing denial of service attacks, deploying viruses, trojans, and worms, etc. Password cracking, enabling unauthorized access. These are some of the mechanisms that are typically faced when we are faced with a cyber attack. In order to address these threats and more, I'm going to pass it back on to Steve to talk about the countermeasures and the steps to cybersecurity. Steve?
Thanks, Atul. So in TCG's Cybersecurity Architect's Guide, which is available on our website, we describe how open standards can be used to address the threat of cybersecurity. And we describe 6 steps to cybersecurity that we recommend. I'm going to take you through those 6 steps and explain them in some detail. And this is a good opportunity for you, if you have some questions about them, to follow up with those questions at the end of the webcast. So the first step that we recommend after you've assessed your risk is to establish a consistent architecture throughout your environment with respect to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is one of those issues that cannot be addressed solely at one point in your architecture and one point in your environment. You need to have endpoint security, you need to have data center security, you need to have network security, and they all have to fit together into a single consistent architecture so that you have the same policies applied across your entire environment and the same philosophy across your entire environment. For example, you may decide that there are some resources in your environment that should be accessible to almost anyone within your enterprise from any endpoint at any time. And that might be typified by this green low security endpoint here, which after user authentication and some identification of the device could get access to all of those different systems, whereas other resources might be more critical, and you might, as part of this consistent architecture, have decided that there are going to be greater requirements for access to those critical resources, and then you could put those additional requirements in place and verify that the endpoints and the users are authorized to have access to those more critical resources. And this limits the risk of damage to those most critical resources, whether those be customer databases or perhaps the critical plans, formulas, and blueprints for your enterprise. On the next slide, we cover the second step to cybersecurity, which is controlling access. So after you've established that architecture, you need to put in place controls that are appropriate for that architecture. And those controls can be network controls. The controls can be access controls that are put in place at the application layer, at a database layer. There are a lot of different points at which you can establish access control checkpoints, but in any case, you need to have those access controls put in place and to have them be consistent with the policies that you've established for what are the prerequisites to access particular resources. And fortunately, there are standards out there from Trusted Computing Group and from other organizations such as the Internet Engineering Task Force that allow you to establish those access controls in a standard way, in a vendor-independent way across your enterprise. Trusted Network Connect is an example of those standards. The third step to cybersecurity is to strengthen the authentication measures that you have in place for your most trusted users. This diagram, which was taken out of our mobile security and BYOD architects guides, illustrates the range of authentication that you might have in place in your enterprise, from a guest who might have no authentication at all, but just get access to the internet as a guest on your guest network, up through trusted users, perhaps with their BYOD devices, who might get some level of access, perhaps to their own personal email, and all the way up to trusted users with trusted devices that are more under corporate control, and perhaps even at the highest level, stronger authentication for those trusted users, such as a smart card or biometric as well. You need to make sure that for those most trusted users who need the most access, who need access to your financial systems and your customer data, that you're putting in place those strong authentication measures. And this is going to reduce your exposure to cybersecurity attacks, just like the access controls and the architecture that we talked about before, because now you've limited what part of your user base and which devices are able to access your most critical resources. And now that you've done so, then you can focus in on those few users and those few devices that have access to those most critical resources, and you can really tighten the screws, so to speak, on those devices and those users, and make sure that they're not getting infected. Now, data encryption is key, because as we've seen, the network, even the corporate network, cannot always be completely trusted. People bring devices onto the corporate network that at times are infected, and we can no longer have a perimeter security model where we just say everything inside the corporate network is trusted, everything outside is untrusted. You need to understand that the corporate network itself is only partially trusted, and so data that's flowing over that corporate network needs to be encrypted, and data at rest needs to be encrypted as well. because devices are highly mobile today, whether it be a smartphone, a tablet, or laptop. Most endpoints, most user devices do tend to travel outside of the enterprise office, and as such, you can be putting critical data at risk if those devices fall into the wrong hands. For that reason, we strongly recommend encrypting all the data on the drive. And the best and most efficient way to do that is with hardware encryption built into the drive. Fortunately, all enterprise vendors these days have self-encrypting drives available where the data on the drive is encrypted at all times. Very convenient, very good from a performance perspective, and of course standards-based in that they're based on the Trusted Computing Group's OPAL standards. So that's something you'll want to look out for and include in your cybersecurity plan. The fifth step to cybersecurity, and here we're getting into the more advanced capabilities. The first four, I think you would agree, are just good common best practices. When you get into layered defenses, this again is a best practice, but it's one that perhaps not every organization reaches. And the idea here is that a single layer of protection is not adequate, especially against a sophisticated attacker, an advanced persistent threat, as they're called, which is the sort of attacker that we face more and more today. Nation states or sophisticated criminals with their spear phishing attacks. Now, in this environment, you may well have a user who is an authorized user using an authorized device, and yet that machine may have become infected. So it's not enough just to use the access controls we talked about earlier, checking the user and the device, but you may also need to put in place interior protections, as we see on the right-hand side. So we have our exterior protections, our perimeter protections, such as a switch or an SSL VPN determining who's allowed on the network, but also interior protections, such as interior firewalls that ensure that only certain users can get access to certain resources, and intrusion prevention components, which are continuously monitoring for what's going on, for anomalous behavior, and then the important thing is to integrate all of these systems so that there's a back channel from the intrusion prevention system or from other sensors. You see the arrow coming up from the bottom there in the diagram. That could be any sort of other sensor that you might have on your network that can detect anomalous behavior. You want to feed that back into your perimeter defenses and to be able to take action based on that. And that's where we really get to the sixth step for cybersecurity, which is automating your security systems. Attacks today are automated, and our defenses have to be automated as well. Perhaps not for every form of defense, but for routine types. If you, for example, have something that seems to be a high security endpoint with an authorized user, and yet it's conducting a port scan, or it's attempting to exfiltrate some data that this user isn't authorized to exfiltrate, to export outside of your organization. You need to stop that in its tracks, because these attackers can get in, get the data that they want, and get out on average in less than an hour. And if you don't have automated systems in place to stop them, you're not going to be able to stop that attack. If you're lucky, you'll find out about the attack a few days or weeks later when you're reviewing your logs, but I'm afraid that's a little too late. That's like closing the barn door after the horse is gone. We need to, and you need to put in place those automated systems so that at least the most critical problems, such as exfiltrating customer data, are things that you can detect and that you can stop immediately. And fortunately, again here, we have standards available for automating security. We have a security automation architect's guide that's available, and you can review that for more information about those standards for automating security. And just to touch on some of the future directions that TCG is engaged in, we are working with the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. CERT on being able to import actionable threat intelligence so that instead of receiving CERT alerts in a textual format where you then have to go in and figure out what that means for your organization, there's a long delay as you figure that out and decide what this alert means to you. They're going to be making those alerts available in a machine-readable format known as STIX, S-T-I-X, and you'll be able to pull those into your systems and to run an automated check to see which of your systems are vulnerable to a new vulnerability or which ones may already be infected. That'll be really nice. Another future direction that we're working on is improving your ability to visualize and understand exactly what's going on your network. The security automation standards that we have, such as IFMAP, provide that unified view, that unified information about what's going on your network, who's connected, what endpoints are they using, are those secure, and what is the behavior according to policy. And this particular effort is to encourage vendors to develop unified dashboards that provide that visibility across multiple vendors' products using the IFMAP standard. And finally, I'm going to mention again this November 19th webcast in Industrial Control System Security. If that is a topic that's relevant to you, whether you have a manufacturing organization or a utility or what have you, that's something that you'll certainly want to follow up on because we are doing some very exciting cutting-edge work in that area. Let's end with a call to action here. It's incumbent on you as information security leaders to assess the risks that you currently face with respect to cybersecurity. We have some guidelines in the slide deck on that. To define your own defense architecture that's relevant to today's attacks, these advanced persistent threats that we all face. And to demand TCG-certified products to fit into an open standards architecture so that you don't end up getting locked into a single vendor, so that you're able to add new sensors to your system at any time in response to new threats and vulnerabilities that you need to be able to deal with. The TCG-certified products have that ability because they all work together in an interoperable fashion. And to learn more at the Trusted Computing Group website, www.trustedcomputinggroup.org. At that site you'll find not only all the standards that we've mentioned here, but also these architect's guides, which describe how to address critical information security problems such as cybersecurity, BYOD, mobile security, secure storage, security automation, and comply to connect. And coming soon, an Industrial Control Systems Security Architect's Guide. All right, let's take a look at the questions that you've posted. I see that there are a couple of them here, and let's just go down this list. The first one that we have is a question that came in today. It says, what about this CryptoLocker virus that's currently circulating? It's a good question. CryptoLocker virus is one example of malware. Now, it does have some really unfortunate side effects in that it locks up your data, encrypts it, and refuses to decrypt it unless you've paid a ransom. But although that's a clever way to write the malware, it's really no different from a prevention perspective than any other malware, in that you want to be able to detect the malware, prevent the malware, and mitigate its effects. And if you have a good cybersecurity system in place, you'll be able to do so to detect it both by phishing and web filtering, So you can detect those malicious emails or malicious web pages by preventing the attack from having any effect if your users do end up landing on a malicious web page. The security settings for their browsers should be configured so that they don't execute any code that's not trustworthy, and likewise within their email clients. And finally, by training your users so that they know not to open attachments that come in via email if that attachment has somehow gotten by your email filtering or clicking on links in untrustworthy emails. And finally, from a mitigation perspective, because the most that you may do, you may do your best efforts to detect and prevent, but there may still be some attacks that get through. CryptoLocker only has the ability to encrypt things that are on the local hard drive. So if you've backed up that drive, then the threat is really not as bad as it could be. Yes, there's some damage, but backups are a common practice and a good practice. So hopefully you're backing up all of that user data so that if the hard drive crashes or it does become infected, you can get the data back. I think we just have time for one more question here since we're at the end of our time. There's a question here: are the standards and tools to enhance cybersecurity actually available now, or are they theoretical? They are absolutely available now. If you look at these TCG Architects Guides, we list them out. And there are quite a few products available that implement these standards that we referred to in the Architects Guides, and quite a few customers who have implemented those products and standards as well. And for more information about that, I would refer you to the TCG website, which has customer case studies as well as a list of certified products. All right, I'm afraid that's all we have time for in terms of answering questions. I hope you've enjoyed this webcast, and thank you very much.